Most people who encounter the Bhagavad Gita focus on chapters 2 through 18, where Krishna delivers some of the most profound spiritual philosophy ever recorded. They treat chapter 1 as the preamble, the setup, the part you get through to reach the real content. They have it completely backwards. Chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita has a specific title, Vishada Yoga, Yoga of Arjuna's sacred grief. Not the setup, not background context, a yoga, a complete spiritual path, named and honored. In chapter 1, Arjuna, a warrior of extraordinary capability, standing on the verge of the most important battle of his life, looks at the battlefield, sees what is required of him, and collapses, drops his bow, cannot function, overcome by grief, confusion, and a profound inability to see clearly. Krishna does not rush him, does not motivate him, does not tell him to push through. He sits beside him. And the most important spiritual teaching in Vedic literature begins not when Arjuna is strong, but when Arjuna is completely undone. If you are exhausted right now, if your old motivations feel hollow, if you cannot see clearly and something in you has simply stopped functioning the way it used to, you are not failing. You are in Vishada, and this video is your Krishna. Chapter 1, The Science of Sacred Collapse. In the 1990s, psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun began studying something that the trauma field had systematically ignored. What happens to people who go through complete collapse, not just difficult experiences, but total undoing, and emerge on the other side? The assumption in psychology had always been that the goal of intervention was to return people to their previous baseline, recovery, getting back to normal. What Tedeschi and Calhoun found was that many survivors didn't return to baseline. They exceeded it. Not in a toxic positive everything happens for a reason way, in a measurable, specific, replicable way. People reported expanded sense of personal strength, deeper relationships, new possibilities previously invisible, greater appreciation for life, and in many cases, profound spiritual development. They called it post-traumatic growth. The key finding for our purposes today, the growth was not correlated with the speed of recovery. It was correlated with something far more counterintuitive. The people who grew the most were the ones who allowed the collapse to be complete, who stopped trying to rebuild the old structure before it had fully dissolved, who sat, like Arjuna, in the Vishada long enough for something genuinely new to form. The ones who rushed back to normal, rebuilt the old identity quickly, pushed through without sitting, recovered, but they didn't grow beyond baseline. The collapse, when fully moved through, is not the obstacle to growth. It is the specific mechanism by which growth beyond previous limits becomes possible. Neuroscience adds a layer. During periods of high allostatic load, accumulated stress exceeding system capacity, the nervous system enters a state of forced plasticity. Old neural architecture becomes unstable. New pathways become dramatically easier to form. The collapse is, at the cellular level, a rewiring opportunity that is only available in that specific state. You cannot access post-traumatic growth without the trauma completing. The completion is the gateway. Chapter 2, 5 Traditions, 1 Map. Every major spiritual tradition has a specific map for this threshold. None of them call it failure. All of them call it initiation. Vishada Yoga, Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 1 is named, honored, and treated as a complete spiritual practice in itself. The Vishada is not Arjuna's weakness, it is his preparation. Without the complete undoing of Chapter 1, the teaching of chapters 2 to 18 would have no ground to land in. The vessel must be emptied before it can receive what it was designed to hold. Fana, Sufi tradition. Fana means annihilation, not death, the dissolution of the constructed self in the presence of something larger. Sufi masters taught that Fana is not the end of the spiritual path, it is the threshold of its deepest phase. What dies in Fana is the self that was organized around a frequency too small for what is coming. The annihilation is the upgrading. Dark night of the soul, Christian mysticism. St. John of the Cross described the dark night not as a punishment or a failure of faith, but as a purification, a necessary void.
The soul, he wrote, must be empty of its attachments to previous consolations before it can receive the deeper union it has been moving toward. The darkness is not the absence of God, it is the presence of something too large for the previous container to hold. Dukkha, Buddhism. The Buddhist concept of dukkha is often translated as suffering, but more precisely it describes the specific dissatisfaction of clinging to forms that are completing. The teaching, dukkha is not a problem to be solved, it is a signal. The signal that attachment to a particular form of self or circumstance has become the source of suffering, and that release, not rebuilding, is what the moment requires. Shamanic dismemberment. In virtually every indigenous shamanic tradition globally, the initiation of a shaman involves what practitioners call dismemberment, a complete dissolution of the previous self, often experienced as literal falling apart. The initiated shaman is then reconstructed, but differently. The reconstruction includes capacities the previous self did not have access to. 5 traditions, 5 geographies, 5 complete lineages with no historical contact, 1 map. The collapse is not the obstacle, it is the initiation. Chapter 3. Why it cannot be bypassed. This is the part most spiritual content never says clearly enough. You cannot go around Vishada, you can only go through it. Every tradition confirms this. The science confirms it. The post-traumatic growth research specifically found that people who bypass the collapse, who use spiritual practices, positive thinking, or sheer willpower to avoid the complete dissolution, recover to baseline, and stop there. The growth that becomes possible only through complete collapse is simply not available through any other mechanism. This is not pessimism. This is the most hopeful thing I can tell you, because it means the exhaustion you are in is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that something is going right, and that the depth of the collapse is proportional to the scale of what is being prepared. Arjuna's Vishada was not small. He was facing the dissolution of everything he understood about dharma, loyalty, and right action. The teaching he was about to receive required a vessel of that magnitude to hold it. Your Vishada is proportional to what you are becoming, not as comfort, as information. The nervous system restructuring that post-traumatic growth science documents, the expanded neural architecture, the new pathways, the increased capacity, requires the old architecture to become genuinely unstable first. You cannot build new structure in a space that is already full. The Vishada empties the space. Chapter 4. The Vishada Protocol. 5 steps, grounded in everything we have decoded today. This is not how to escape Vishada, this is how to move through it, and arrive on the other side with what the collapse was preparing you for. Step 1. Name it correctly. Stop calling this burnout, stop calling it depression, stop calling it failure. Name it Vishada. The naming matters more than it seems. Burnout is a problem to be solved. Vishada is a threshold to be moved through. The word you use determines the posture you bring to the experience. One is a malfunction, one is an initiation. Choose the frame that serves your actual situation. Step 2. Stop rebuilding. Identify the specific thing you have been trying to reconstruct that keeps dissolving. The relationship, the identity, the career framework, the belief system. Ask honestly, is this dissolving because it needs to be rebuilt or because it has completed? If it keeps dissolving despite your efforts to rebuild it, it is completing. Stop rebuilding. Let it complete. The post-traumatic growth research is specific. The growth happens in the space created by the dissolution, not in the reconstruction of what dissolved. Step 3. Regulate first, inquiry second. Your nervous system in Vishada is in high allostatic load. Before any meaningful inquiry, journaling, or practice, regulate. Extended exhale breathing. 4 counts in, 8 counts out, 5 minutes minimum. From the regulated state only, bring the question, what is completing in me right now? Not what is wrong, what is completing? The question itself reorients the nervous system from threat response to curious inquiry. Step 4. Sit with Krishna. Identify the presence in your life that functions as your Krishna. The voice, person, practice, or quality of awareness that sits beside you without trying to fix what is happening. It may be a specific person. It may be a journaling practice. It may be silence itself. It may be prayer or meditation. Whatever it is, access it daily during Vishada, not to receive answers, to be accompanied. Arjuna didn't need Krishna to solve his problem in chapter 1. He needed Krishna to sit with him while the Vishada completed. The teaching that followed was only possible because of that. Step 5. Track the signal. Once per day, morning if possible, ask your body one question. What frequency am I being prepared for? Not with your mind, with your body. Hand on sternum, eyes closed, slow breath. The answer may not come as words. It may come as a sensation of expansion in a particular direction, a subtle pull towards something you haven't permitted yourself to want yet. That pull is the frequency on the other side of Vishada. Trust it enough to note it. Just note it, daily. The noting is the preparation. Outro. Bhagavad Gita chapter 1 ends without resolution. Arjuna is still on the ground. The armies are still waiting. The battle has not begun, and the chapter simply ends. The ancient editors of the Gita made a deliberate choice. Do not rush out of the Vishada. Stay in it long enough to feel its full weight. Long enough to understand that the man who rises in chapter 2 is not the same man who fell in chapter 1. Something completed in that space. Something new became possible. What remains genuinely mysterious, across every tradition and across all the science, is this. The growth that becomes possible through Vishada cannot be specified in advance. It is not a predictable output of a known input. It is something that arises in the space created by complete dissolution that could not have been planned, predicted, or manufactured by the self that existed before it. Every tradition confirms this. None can explain it completely. That gap between what the collapse removes and what arises in its place is where something genuinely sacred lives. Drop architect in the comments if this video found you at the right moment. Next week, the specific neuroscience and ancient practices that mark the transition out of Vishada, how you know when the threshold has been crossed and the new frequency is ready to be lived. Subscribe. New decoded consciousness content every week. You are the architect of your own frequency.